everyone, and thank you to the organizers for inviting me to bring my work on the political ecology of flooding, flood risk, and storm drainage infrastructure into conversation with this panel on infrastructures of labor. I'm going to tell you a story today about why the city of Bangalore, officially Bengaluru, in southern India, is increasingly prone to flooding. And this is a story that really resonates with a great many cities around the world. Developing Asia is one of the areas in the world that is most at risk from climate change-induced flooding, and so it's a good case to think with. I've been doing ethnographic field work here for the last 2 years, trying to understand the historic reasons behind the production of flood risk. So I'm going to try and tell you that story through a historicization of the labor involved in producing a humble and often neglected artifact, stormwater drains. Now, stormwater drains are really neglected in the scholarly literature as well, because as you heard from the list that was read out, there's water, research on water, on electricity, on sanitation, but very little research actually on stormwater drains. It's kind of a generic name for a range of infrastructures, right? Including pipes, ditches, canals, rooftop spouts, open drains, combined sewer systems, storm flow systems that you see very much so in the case of Euro-American cities. And they're intended fundamentally to help protect human settlements from the onslaught of rain. So I've been considering these artifacts very seriously, and my overarching argument is that we have to look at these storm drainage infrastructures as assemblages, okay, as socio-natural assemblages. They've been enrolled through human labor into these different assemblages over time, but that these assemblages also wield a more than human agency in the production of flood risk. So while they have been made by human labor, in turn, they exert a kind of agency that we have to really be cautious of and try to understand going forward, thinking about climate change risks and thinking about extreme weather events. As we will see here in the story I'm going to tell you today, the changing assemblage relationships that storm drains have had in this developing city with the colonial state and then the post-colonial state, with sewage, with waste, and with capital accumulation all matter in the production of flood risk. And so I'm really going to talk about how materiality matters here, how it has a particular agency. Now, why the city of Bangalore and why flood risk? Well, at first glance, Bangalore is a city of 8 million people, similar to New York. It seems an unlikely place to study flooding, right? Unlike coastal cities like Mumbai or Dhaka in developing Asia, Bangalore actually sits 3,000 feet above sea level in the rain shadow of the Deccan Plateau, and it does not experience extreme rainfall like some of the other coastal cities do. Yet, in 2005, Bangalore experienced one of the worst floods in recent memory, 3 months after rain wreaked havoc on Mumbai. Now, if you remember 2005, it was a particularly bad year around the world, with Hurricane Katrina also happening in New Orleans that year, and severe floods throughout developing Asia. Although mortality was many times lower in Bangalore than in Mumbai, over half of the city and its major roads, especially at the outskirts, the peri-urban outskirts, were inundated. Thousands of homes and commercial establishments suffered flood damage. Colleges and schools were shut. Hospitals reported alarmingly high numbers of waterborne diseases. So these pictures were taken by a friend of mine in 2005. I actually wasn't there, but an urban planner, a friend of mine, who took these pictures in the same field site that I was to start work in 2 years later on the politics of water access. So while the 2005 floods were precipitated by a sort of extremely unusual rainfall event, between 2007 and 2014, so currently, several parts of the city have been flooding following only moderate intensity rainfall, right? So floods are becoming increasingly common and increasingly dire. So the question is why? What is going on with the infrastructure? So to begin to answer this question, we have to look a little bit at the city's ecology. Bangalore has this ancient interconnected wetland system consisting of both human-engineered and naturally occurring lakes or tanks. that date back to the founding of the city several centuries ago, 500 years ago. With no major river of its own, but 4 major valleys draining a number of smaller streams and lakes, the city's terrain, which is very undulating, was ideally suited to creating this interlinked, engineered wetland system. Right? The wetlands were cascading, they were interconnected through open canals, which eventually became the city's stormwater drains. This, as the city urbanized, these stormwater drains underwent several important political, economic, and ecological changes. So now this part natural and part human-made wetland system was built to sustain a highly hierarchical and patriarchal feudal system, one in which the domestication and control of lower castes and women went hand in hand with the domestication of monsoonal rains. However, the nature of this interlinked system, even several centuries ago, was that during times of exceptionally strong rainfall, there would be a domino effect whereby storm overflows would cascade into and destroy people's settlements. And as we've seen the history of civilization and flooding, the stronger the structures you build to keep waters out, the more devastating the effects are when there's actually a flood event, right? So in fact, this system has always wielded what Bruce Braun and Sarah Watmore refer to as a sometimes terrifying, more than human margin of indeterminacy. And that's what we're really grappling with when we think about, future environmental change, is this sort of margin of indeterminacy that non-human agency can also wield. Now, this margin of indeterminacy and the kind of agential powers of infrastructure are especially problematic and of concern when infrastructure like this is enrolled in different political projects, right? So I'm going to talk about a particular change in the ways in which this infrastructure was enrolled into a state project, and that was really the first one was during colonialism. So during the height of colonialism in the late 1800s, British engineers decided to use Bangalore's original wetland system and its storm canals as a way to drain the city of waste and of filth, especially in the aftermath of disease outbreaks. So you see this happening in several colonial cities around the world. And in Bangalore, it was the aftermath of the plague, the bubonic plague in 1896, in which wetlands were then suddenly thought of as these sanitary outlets. So, of course, this was done in highly racialized ways, with poor natives being targeted for slum demolition and water and sanitation infrastructure being laid in highly segregated and uneven ways. And this, of course, set in motion the uneven flood risk we see today. So this is what happened in Bangalore at the turn of the century. The net effect of the plague and of colonial planning was that wetlands were repurposed as sanitation drains. And so suddenly they were doing a different work. So I want to problematize the way we think about work here and also bring in the non-human here in terms of the agency and in terms of the capacity to affect disaster in this case. So since wetlands were no longer seen as necessary for water supply by the colonial government, they started to invest in, they had started by that time to invest in large-scale heavy engineering water projects. These wetland canals were used as sanitation, as outlets for sanitation from the colonial period onwards. And I noticed that this continued to happen into the contemporary period as well. As I was repeatedly told by the city's stormwater department, the Water Supply and Sewerage Board continues to locate sewer manholes within stormwater drains, with grave consequences for flood risk, especially in lower-lying informal areas. So this is a site that you see very commonly with sewage being channeled into stormwater drains or into the erstwhile canals that connected Bangalore's wetlands. And this historic legacy has meant today, and so this is the kind of picture that really makes your stomach churn, of course. But this is the kind of dirty kind of materiality and the filth that laborers today find themselves having to deal with, right? Because of and part of this historic legacy and the rapid urbanization of the city. So I was told in vivid detail about the kind of filth and refuse that ends up in these stormwater drains. A problem that, of course, makes it really disastrous when it rains. So everything from hospital waste to discarded furniture to colossal amounts of plastic waste ends up in the stormwater drains. So much so that the acronym SWD is often taken to mean something else. As I was told by a stormwater engineer, Srinivas, here's our contractor, he said. You ask him, what does SWD stand for? He'll say it's sanitary water drains. Even they don't know what the original purpose of these drains were. Just imagine the filth the workmen will be immersed in while working. So he went on to tell me that it is typically migrant labor involved in cleaning the drains. And this is a kind of a standard picture you see. And people who immigrate from drought-stricken states in India come to Bangalore to find day labor jobs. And so the cleaning of these stormwater drains that are so clogged with a number of different kinds of waste because of historic legacies is left to these migrant laborers. And it's really a race to keep up. The city is constantly trying to clear its storm drains from waste that lands up there. It's called desilting. But with compounded with poor solid waste management and the conflation of stormwater and sanitary water, such dirty work often falls to the most marginalized of urban residents. Unfortunately, when it rains, the blocked nature of these drains means that stormwater gushes into informal settlements that usually have the worst kind of upkeep as far as the drains go. Okay, so I'm gonna transition now to a second really important assemblage, and kind of a reassembling of socio-natural relations in the contemporary period. And that is that these wetlands have been revalued as real estate. So not only were they revalued in the colonial period as sanitary outlets, but in the contemporary, the millennial period, they've been revalued as land, as commodity. So what we see today is an intensifying relationship between storm drains and capital. And sort of mediating those relations is an increasingly informalized state apparatus. So with the increasing circulation of capital in Bangalore's economy over the last decade, generated, of course, through the rapid growth of the IT economy, new sites of land are being commodified, and wetland actually are being commodified. And you, of course, see that in in city after city where the wetlands have been eroded. In the case of New Orleans, the wetlands were changed by the Army Corps of Engineers, and that, of course, helped to make the area and the lower lying wards particularly flood prone. So similarly, here wetlands are being revalued as real estate in the current moment and repurposed as real estate. So the city's wetlands that have not been spared from kind of speculative real estate development, and in fact afford the opportunity for squeezing out and commodifying additional fictitious land, to use a phrase from Karl Polanyi, with dire repercussions for flood risk. So this is this is a picture of the South Bangalore, and the red areas are flood-prone areas, right? Critical, low-lying, flood-prone areas that consistently face the worst kind of damage when there's monsoonal rains. And so what I did was I overlaid this GIS map with Google satellite images of the same area over the last 10 years, just to give you a sense of the kind of development, just in the space of 10 years, that are happening over wetland channels. And this is the result of what that kind of real estate development looks like. So we have to think about how these new socio-natural assemblages are implicated in worsening environmental risk and urban flood risk. And what happens is this is with residents settling in these areas, there's a kind of a work involved, of course, in creating these settlements that directly comes into conflict with the kind of agency that you're seeing once it rains, with kind of non-human agency, or this terrifying margin of indeterminacy. So flood risk that is besetting the city is very uneven. It affects areas that are informal, that have been the outcome of the commodification of wetlands that takes place through very legally tenuous channels. So we can talk a little bit more about, in the question and answer session, about the potential possibilities for kind of redirecting the labor, both human and non-human laborers, and allowing for more just possibilities. But what I've tried to do here is to show you through this very brief example the ways in which storm drains have been enrolled through human labor into different socio-natural assemblages over time, but that these assemblages in turn also wield a powerful kind of agency in the production of flood risk. So I'll end it there and look forward to your reflections. Thanks a lot.